Okay, well, greetings, viewers, listeners. Welcome to another episode of our series, Health and Disease, A Perspective. So what we hope is that people will find this something interesting, absorbing, fascinating to actually think, look at the processes of thought surrounding how we see health and disease, and maybe it will have wider benefits. So that's the general intro, if you like, Alex.
Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon.
Yeah, we're all afternoon now. Yeah.
Afternoon. Yes. Yeah. What would you like me to?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, if you could just sort of say your perspective on the general point of what we're trying to achieve, the general scope of our discussion, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, as those who have watched the first couple, we talked. I mean, COVID, the whole thing around COVID and what people were talking about there and we brought in about germ theory and terrain theory. But what you and I were talking about earlier, Peter, was that we are, as humans, we are creatures of habit, and we have been perhaps taught to see things in a particular way, which is quite understandable. And that's, if you like, it's a sort of form of, I suppose people might refer to it as conditioning, programming, whatever it is. We've learnt it, from a very, very early age. We don't even think we don't even perhaps appreciate that's indeed what we're doing. We are seeing the world, we are behaving, we're taking certain actions, reacting, etc., because according to our understanding, that's all we can do, and there's nothing wrong with that. In this series of discussions, I think my understanding, Peter, I hope this chimes with what you feel as well, is that we want to try and broaden perhaps the collective understanding that it's not right or wrong. There are ways of looking at things, particularly where it comes to health and illness and disease, etc. And but there are other ways that can be that in which our health, and that, by the way, also brings in the notion of fitness. People have ideas of what fitness means, but our health, and thence what happens when we don't have good health, well, illness and disease, etc. Because if we can begin to see things in a slightly different way, it doesn't have to be a massive change, but even a slightly different way, it can affect us in the sense of that it starts affecting the decisions that we take when it comes to such things as, for example, eating, sleeping, exercise, etc., which can impact our health in a positive way. So I think that's how I would see it. If we can, by simply imparting some ideas of how we can see, as I say, health and illness, etc., it may begin to affect, or may begin to make us question in as simple a way as possible. Well, hang on a second, maybe I need to look at this again. Maybe it's not quite so straightforward. Maybe I don't need to be quite so frightened of a bug going around, but actually, utilize what, in fact, we've been given. Taking, for example, the immune system. The immune system is, we've all got it. We've all got an immune system. But do we know what prevents that immune system from working in tip-top condition? Maybe there are some very simple things we can do. That's before we take any supplements or anything like that. There are some very simple actions we can take which will improve not just our immune system, but our overall health.
Okay, yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense. And just to recap what we did last time, we looked at Occam's razor. And I think really the essence of that was the need for simplicity of explanation. This tendency that we're going to be looking for simpler explanations. Okay, I mean, it's not to say the simplest is necessarily the best, but there is a general bias, we would say, in favor of something that is less complicated. And we feel, or perhaps in different ways, because we do have different perspectives, but that there is a lot of over complexity in let's call it the philosophy of health and disease, the way people understand what's going on in these phenomena we call disease. So that's the summary. Is there anything else you want to add to that summary of what we did last time, Alex?
No, I think that's it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's exactly what, I think you're right. I think that's the sort of, as you say, the sort of perhaps overcomplication of things that don't have to be that complicated or that complex.
Yeah. So the key one for me, the one I wanted to raise, was the idea of diseases, plural. So what I see when I look at health or medical philosophy, whatever you want to call it, the sort of assumptions that underlie the way health and disease are dealt with. And that assumption is the existence of a multiplicity of diseases, so-called. And it's a growing number because regularly the world of medical science will tell us, there is a new disease. There is, type 2 diabetes, or, COVID, long COVID, short COVID, COVID-13. I don't know, but we get these new names for these diseases coming up. So this is definitely a complicated model. Okay, I mean, it's just taken for granted that it must be right, I suppose, by a lot of people anyway. But if you sit down and think, well, just a minute, this is it's complex, and this ties in with the whole thing of diagnosis. That you have a symptom, right, and this could be the result of any number of diseases. And if you go to different doctors, they give you different diagnoses, that it's this disease or that disease. Okay, so my starting point really is just to introduce that complication and say, do we need to think about this? What do you say, Alex?
I absolutely agree. And as you were talking, Peter, something came to mind which I hadn't thought of before. I've got a family member whose son which by all accounts, it seems to be an epidemic of childhood behavioural issues, etc., where kids are finding it, increased levels of anxiety and stress, and finding it difficult at school, and coping, etc. And in this instance, we've had conversations with this particular family member about this, and there has been almost a willingness or an earnestness to find a label. And I was talking to a colleague of mine, or somebody who's in the business that I'm involved in, who's a medical doctor, and she was saying everything has just become everything's over medicalized. There seems to be a rush to stick a blasted label on everything. Some sort of phenomenon, aberration, something people are doing differently. Oh, we've got to stick a label on it, and then we can treat whatever it is. I agree with you. I think well, hang on a second. This is getting just silly. Where are we going with this? And going back to what you were saying about the diseases, etc., and also you said about Occam's razor and trying to keep things simple. I remember when I was doing my science degree, I was always very interested. I didn't want to do all the sort of basic stuff about the structure and function of the body and all that sort of thing. I wanted to dive into, the pathology, because I thought that's what was really fascinating. Looking back on it now, I actually realize that, in fact, how something works, how it's designed to work, so both the structure and the function of it, to me is actually much more interesting, because you can almost predict what will happen when it doesn't work properly. Now that's when you start getting the so-called, you get, if you like, a misfiring. And if it carries on misfiring, what maybe starts out as a functional problem, in other words, it doesn't quite function the way it's meant to be functioning, if left long enough, that could then become quite a serious condition. Because obviously if it's not functioned correctly, say something's happening in the gut, where the gut is, you take food in, the gut does its stuff, and then pushes out the waste at the other end. If something happens in between the two ends, where you put food in and the waste comes out, that isn't quite working properly, and you don't start addressing that, you start getting a whole series of symptoms.
Yes.
The body will start telling you and telling other people something's not right. It's built in. It's how our bodies are,
Yes.
sort of de facto, if you like. Yeah, you start getting these things. It's saying this isn't right, sort of thing. So you need to wake up and say, well, okay,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Okay. So let's just, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Okay. Sorry. I just immediately an example, an example of this could be that you eat like 10 Mars bars a day or something. Imagine that somebody for whatever reason eats a large number of Mars bars each day.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be various digestive and connected disorders. Now, what do we do with that? We say, oh, right, we're going to find a name for this thing. So this poor kid has, all sorts of things going on, which are, disturbing him and everybody else. But we need a name for it, and we're going to look at the way it happens in the body and stuff, and then we'll find a name. And this, and then doctor, well, it's this, But, in fact, we know that the way that is dealt with is by simply removing the cause, which is excess consumption of Mars bars.
Yeah.
And isn't this what is happening a lot? It ties in with what you're saying. Find the label, find the label. Well, what about, what's the reasons? Let's look at the child's life. What's going on? And then you deal with that and the thing stops.
Yeah.
So, and it's this layer of complexity in the middle of wanting to name something.
Yeah. And in fact, it's become a whole industry that what you do in the example you've given, take it to the extreme level, you get to a point where done over a period of time, 10 Mars bars becomes 10,000 Mars bars over 10 years or whatever it is, etc., where the body's inbuilt mechanisms to counteract that, rather extreme way of, giving yourself nutrition, comes to a point where it can't do it anymore. And then you end up with a situation where that inbuilt self-correcting, self-balancing, homeostatic mechanisms, those mechanisms which are already built into the whole system, fail, and you get this condition, if you like. Yeah. And that's where then the Western medicine says, right, this is the pathology, this is the disease, we now find something that can correct it. But in fact, if we take that particular example, where there was a time where, in this particular case, it was said you couldn't correct without medication, in fact, you can, with a strict modification to your diet.
Yeah.
So you can do something.
Well, that's it.
And that's, I think the example you've given is a good one, because if you understand how it works, the structure, the function, what happens, how it works in normal circumstances, what happens if it does get abused, if you like, the Mars bar, the 20 however times to the power of whatever it is, Mars bars, etc., which spikes your sugars and all that sort of stuff. That ability to correct that begins to stutter and saying, I can't cope with this anymore. But you can, some things are not entirely reversible. You can do something about it, rather than just putting somebody onto, as you say, giving it a label, and then you say, right, this is how we treat and manage the label.
Yeah.
Well, what about the total physiology? Yeah. What about the person? What are they doing? So in other words, we, as you say, we don't just look at the symptomatology and that part of it and treat that. We look at that in its entirety.
Yeah. So a way Occam's razor can be, summarized as the, minimization of entities, right? You don't want to create an inordinate number of entities. And it seems to me this labeling process is this entity creation. Okay, you've got a situation which causes an imbalance, right? And then, but what the whole scientific scene does? Okay, there's an entity somewhere in there, and that's attacking, and it has this. I mean, this is very interesting. If you think about what these entities called diseases are, right? Okay, so what is a disease? Well, it's some sort of energy. It has some. It's acting, right? Because if you use about the language and to stop disease, to prevent, to halt, to curtail, to hold back, all sorts of expressions which imply it's some energy, it's some acting energy. That's one aspect of it. But another interesting aspect of it, it's a destructive energy. That is a very important assumption about that there is an energy which is trying to at least downgrade your health, but even to kill you. And that often the greatest, alarmism and stress and so on is related to the idea that there's something out there trying to kill you. And these are the entities which are, conjured out of thin air. And in fact, we don't, where are they? Where are these things? Because we have the symptoms, okay? We have this thing called simply the phenomena. So we've all experienced the phenomena, okay? And we have I would say the cause, some sort of thing some sort of stress put on the body. But there's something else called a disease. And well, I mean, and I think, an entity, it's not only a multiplication entity, but it's an entity with sort of interesting qualities. There are thousands of these destructive energies. And if you really take that to its logical conclusion, that leaves you a very sort of chaotic, alarming type world that you're living in. So I don't know how you see these entities. What do you think about them?
Absolutely. The idea of energy, I mean, it's not a new idea. It's an idea that's been around for an awful long time. The idea that we are energy, all is energy, manifesting at many different levels. You can for yourself, you think about what an atmosphere in a room, which is somebody is extremely depressed or very negative. I don't know if you've ever experienced it yourself, where you've gone into a room and you just think, good God, where the hell, this atmosphere in here is awful.
Yeah.
What's going on in that room? The energy is terrible.
Yeah.
Think about being around somebody that is just very negative, and they feel like they're just sucking the energy out of you, like a sort of like a Death Eater from Harry Potter, one of those sort of things. Or conversely, you're in the presence of somebody who is just has something about them that is uplifting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about those energies. I mean, in that sense, the sort of destructive energies, which, if we allow them, if we either partake of that and allow that to start we don't guard against those destructive energies. What can they do? As you say, what can that do to our own systems? And what I was going to go back to was this idea of the homeostasis, the balance, etc. The body is designed to be in balance.
Yes.
That is a given. You just go, anybody can look up just a basic sort of A-level, even O-level explanation of the endocrine system. That system is designed to be in balance. The hormones, secretions, etc., and all the glands, the endocrine glands, etc. And also the fact that the internal temperature, the body temperature, is maintained at 37.5 degrees C. That the internal pH is maintained at a particular, the pH is maintained at a particular level, and that the body the internal environment is maintained physically at a particular level, so that all the biochemical reactions, the proteins, the enzymes, they can work and function in the way they're meant to function. So there's already a plan, if you like. There's a structure there. There's already there.
Yes.
We're just studying what is already there. Where science has excelled itself is discovering what's already there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's incredible. It's, to me, and I think going back to the word disease, if you put a hyphen between the S,
yes,
and then put dis-ease.
Yes.
Ease is the balance.
Yes.
When it's dis-eased, it's out of balance.
Yeah.
So from dis-ease comes these
Yes.
these illnesses or whatever it is. But it seems to be the whole industry, if you like, around medicine is to elevate the disease.
Yes.
This, in some instances, you almost get the impression that they're saying, well, we're being attacked by something else.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm.
So I see what I mean. I mean, so I think, to try and get back to simplicity, start from a simple point. I think it's very important what you said. Disease. I mean, that's the fundamental reality. You have, health is this state of balance, harmony, normality. You're just getting on with life, really.
Yeah.
There's no issue about the functioning of your body or your mind, maybe, but principally your physical. There's no issue with it. It's just what you expect. It's natural, and you get on with things. So disease is when there are phenomena which are unusual and probably disruptive, some sort of disruption that they cause. So that's the starting point. We agree that that's happening, okay? And it's about the explanation of that. Now, is this disruption because one of the 10,586 diseases, or now tomorrow 10,587 diseases, is attacking you, right? And the symptoms, the phenomenon are this particular disease shows this combination of so-called symptoms. Is that really, something logical, helpful? Is that sustainable as a way of thinking, or is it something where, okay, there's some cause of this imbalance, and on the simplest examples we know that, if you go into a smoky room, you start coughing, right? And that's the cause, and all you need to do is open the window or leave the room or whatever, and the coughing stops. So you don't need to go into some great process of diagnosis. And maybe that sort of simplicity is much wider than we think. That people, people say, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I know that's true, and but it's more complicated. But looking for some practical solution, removal of cause, removal of the thing that's causing the imbalance, should be the priority.
I completely agree. Interestingly, and this perhaps is the cynic in me, is there's no money in that.
Well, of course, of course.
I mean, as you're stating, to me, it's, dare I say, bleeding obvious. But there is I use the term industry. There's a whole industry about this thing about sort of elevating the disease to something you've got to attack, cure, and all this sort of stuff. When in fact, as you said right from the start about Occam's razor and coming to something logical and simplest explanation, is in fact we have the answers within us. We just don't seem to have the confidence to be able to not just accept that, but even find them. And as you said yourself, I mean, you've used the example, you go into a smoky room and you start coughing, rather than, as you say, looking for it, paying somebody or whatever, or getting somebody to make a diagnosis. Get out the smoky room. In fact, that's a very simple way of describing. In other words, this thing about personal responsibility. I've heard it too often being said, oh, I'll go and make an appointment to see the doctor, they'll sort it out for me. I was thinking, well, hang on a second. Let's have a look at this. Are you sure about this? Are you sure they've got an answer for this? Maybe there's something much simpler. The answer is much simpler than that.
Yeah.
So, I think, yes, absolutely. I don't know where this desire to make things more complicated comes from. Perhaps we just don't, as I say, have the confidence or trust that in fact things are as simple. But it's almost like we've gone so far away from that.
Well, yeah, that's it. I think it's sort of, it becomes an end in itself, and as you say, money. Once an industry develops around a philosophy, let's say, or a way of thinking, then if that's a way of thinking which isn't correct, you're beginning to have problems, aren't you? Because there are interests, people have material interests in it.
Well, do you know what? Exactly. There is you said about interest, vested interests. You know, if people are, dare I say it, protecting their bottom lines, if you like,
Yeah,
you know, they have an interest in claiming that their way of seeing it is more important than everybody else.
yeah,
And I think for me, I hope that in our, you know, when in talking to you, Peter, and etc., that people perhaps stop and think a little bit more, start thinking for themselves, you know, and have the courage to question.
yeah,
We nobody has a right over our bodies and our health and how they just because something's being prescribed, we don't have to take it. We don't, if we want to question that there may be another way of looking at something. And I do sense that people are perhaps beginning to challenge
mhm,
this way of thinking. They're not accepting it. My only concern is that we don't go if we go from one extreme to another,
mhm.
because then we may end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. All that useful research and scientific knowledge, etc., has a place.
Yes,
We don't want to just say, "Oh, those experts don't know what they're talking about." We need to, let's just throw it out and, perhaps go into stuff that arguably could be referred to as hearsay. Um, and this is where, going back to what you said about energies, it's strange, but if you start talking to anyone in Western medicine about that, they sort of eyes roll up to the heaven, and you're talking about healing or whatever it is. I think this is part of the problem, is that there appears to be a sort of how can I put it, a monopoly
yes.
on what is true, and as soon as you start challenging it, you're a heretic.
Well, yes. Obviously that's the situation.
Yeah,
That there is this is one area where the pattern of thinking is very jealously protected, and deviation from that is very quickly noted and shut down, let's say.
yeah.
So, that is just hard reality. So what we're doing here is it's sort of subversive, just to sort of question it, is sort of on the subversive side, maybe. But, on the other hand, people have to think freely, it's just, we have logic, we have a desire to understand our world in the best way possible, to get a clearer, more accurate, more practical, if you like, pragmatic, realistic understanding of the phenomena of the world in which we live. So, I just hope today we've made some little contribution, on that path, that people might think, okay, maybe I just need to be a bit more flexible in the way I think about this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, if people ever ask, well, how can you prove any of this? I would say just look at nature.
Mm-hmm.
Watch nature in action.
Yeah.
If you're a gardener, or if you just look at how things grow, how things change, how etc., it's all there. It doesn't need so-called scientific proof in that sense. If you read, read between the lines, the nature's laws, they're all there in any case. The strange thing is when people say they've discovered something, as if discovery and invention are somehow, aligned or whatever it is. No, they haven't. It's been there anyway. You've just come to it at this particular stage. For my part, I think it's been known about much, much longer than I think the current crop of Western knowledge.
Yes, well, and I think, there was a movement called the hygienic movement, which started with, I don't know if you heard of Graham bread. Graham bread. It's like wholemeal bread.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Well, the guy who developed that, sort of early 19th century US in America.
Right.
And
Grahamism.
Yeah. So he started this. Well, it started, but he was the first person who extensively developed. We're talking about extensive tomes that people wrote. The years right up to a guy called Shelton in the 20th century, who was very extensive on this.
Yeah.
So people have, tried to look at things in a different way. And
Yeah.
it's been predominant. It's something that was shut down. It's this literature is suppressed. You can find it if you know how to find it. You have to just be very persistent in the way you search on the internet, but you will find it. Just a different perspective, and scientific. We're not talking about, this word quack is sort of thrown around, isn't it? People sort of like to throw it around. But it's really just a term of abuse. Ultimately the quack is somebody who's exploiting, people's ignorance, I guess. But the question is, who's doing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, quackery is used today's world to look at anyone that isn't allopathic, uses allopathic medicine. Whereas back in the day, you'd have snake oil salesmen and quacks sometimes were medically trained because of the stuff coming up with. So, I mean, labels.
That's it. So we have to just move away from these labels for a bit, just to say, okay, but is there any topic? Can we talk? That's the question I'm asking the world. Can we discuss this? Is it allowed? Am I allowed that freedom of thought? Let alone the freedom just to say, I don't want to do something because I don't believe there's any basis for dealing with health issues in this way. That's one thing which we were sort of threatened with, a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But beyond that, okay, are we allowed to discuss this?
Yes.
If not, why not?
Yeah.
So hopefully we can, keep things going in that vein.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think if, again, I think all we're doing is we are gently exploring another way of looking at the same thing. And I think that's all we can do. And I think if there are any groups, individuals, groups who say, "Oh no, you're." I remember somebody once saying to me, actually, just thinking about it. Someone said, "Oh, what you're saying is that's dangerous thought." Dangerous, whatever it is. I was thinking, dangerous to start thinking for yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, that's the whole thing. The whole, the narrative, isn't it? We call it the narrative.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this in the media and the general thought world that is broadcast and widely accepted, and you've got to go within these confines, and it's dangerous to think outside the box, let's say. So how dangerous is it? How dangerous is it to think outside? How dangerous is it to stay inside?
Well, it comes back, exactly. And it comes back to the question I think we all can ask ourselves, where do we want, how do we want to live our lives? Because ultimately, the way in which we consider things or not has an impact on our actions, which has an impact on our health.
Of course. That's it. Yeah, and that's why we're talking about it, because it has practical implications. Very practical.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is really important. It's not just you and I having a natter about some ideas, because the ideas ideas live, and ideas can be transformative.
Yes.
They're taken in and acted upon. That's really the only way that one finds out whether something actually is so.
Yeah, that's it. Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great to talk once again, Alex, and thank you for all listeners and viewers who've come this far. We hope that you found it useful, interesting, entertaining, whatever. And we hope that we'll be able to take this further in the future. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that.